Everyone will experience grief in their lifetime, and there is no avoiding it. Grief can be defined as deep, intense sorrow or suffering. It can look like anxiety, depression, PTSD, the list goes on. My grief was a result of my trauma, and it was in the aftermath of my trauma, after the initial shock wore off, that I came face to face with grief. In April of 2020, I lost my younger brother, and it was easily the most devastating loss of my life. I felt shattered. I had no sense of self. The foundation that I had once had no longer existed. And each day I suffered and I struggled, and I was so desperate to push my grief away, to make it go away. I thought, maybe I can intellectualize it, process it, bring awareness to it. And I did that, and still, I didn't feel like I was healing. I was still ashamed of my grief. I wanted to hide it from everyone. And I thought to myself, I don't know who I am, but I know I don't want to be broken. And my grief was a daily reminder that I was. And there was no changing that, because there was no changing what happened. And so that's how I lived. That's how I operated. Subconsciously, consciously, I took on grief as my identity. And about a year later, I was having a really rough night, just really feeling the pain. And I was on a grief forum, and someone had recommended a book. And it was a spiritual book that had teachings around the consciousness, the self, the soul, all these really fascinating philosophies and concepts that I was a bit familiar with, but I wasn't totally grasping them at that point in my life. And so I found it intriguing enough where I was like, okay, there's something here, and I wanted to continue learning more about that part of myself, because I wasn't doing that before. And I wasn't learning about myself in that way. And so, I'm still struggling, I'm still suffering, I'm still operating, through the lens of grief. And I was like, I'm gonna go meditate, because I just need some peace in my life. Again, still looking desperately outside of myself for something. And all the wisdom I was accumulating and this knowledge was really helpful and was really interesting, but it was like I wasn't doing anything with it. I was just holding on to it. And so I meditated. I went into 3 Joules one day, and I sat there, and I was like, finally some peace. And it was not peaceful. It was transcendent and powerful and emotional and overwhelming, so different than what I thought it was gonna be, and everything that I needed it to be without realizing. And it was an inner guide meditation, and I called my brother in as my teacher. And I remember his face materializing in my visualization, his eyes, his smile, and he looked at me like, finally, I've been waiting to meet you here. And I sat with that, and I thought, all this time I was looking everywhere but here. And I told him, I was like, Arsim, I'm so lost. Please help me. Please tell me something. What do I need to hear? What do I need to know? And all of this truth poured out of him and poured out of me. Things about myself that were going on that I was aware of, but a little bit deeper this time, a little bit more real this time, a little bit less intellectualized. And I left that meditation completely changed. It was what I needed to realize that my grief wasn't to be avoided or to be ashamed of or to push away and hide. I needed to nurture it. And meditation was the tool that allowed me to nurture my relationship with my grief. And that is what changed the way that I operated and the way that I navigated through life and the way that I felt about myself. Because the more that I could see what grief really was, which is love, immeasurable, deep love, the more I could love myself and accept myself and finally heal. I felt a profound sense of healing and safety, and I had found a home within myself that I didn't realize existed. And I started to feel this foundation rebuilding again, truly rebuilding a solid foundation. And it's a lot easier to find myself with that type of grounding and that type of connection with my soul, my inner self, my brother. And that's why I continue to meditate, because that's how I go within. I have the power to go within. I have the tools to go within. I can see grief differently now. And all this time, I saw it as ugly and dark and unlovable. And now I know that it's love. And that changes everything. And so I will leave you with this. It's the statement that I had given you at the beginning of this talk, but this time it's a little bit different. Everyone will experience love in this lifetime, and there's no avoiding it. And I think that is a far less scary and far more beautiful sentiment to live with.